Good evening, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of ITV, where Legal Ease, where we try and make the law as easy as possible for you. We convert legal jargon into everyday language, and it gets very complicated sometimes when you're dealing with lawyers, when you're dealing with the law. And we thought for tonight's program, we'll talk about the basics. What do you do when you hire a lawyer? How do you decide to hire a lawyer? What about payment? What is the role of the lawyer? How do you choose lawyers? And we've got an expert in the field today who's agreed to come in and talk to us, Mr. Munya Gwanzura. Welcome to the program, and thank you for making yourself available. Munya, Firstly, you've been in a lawyer yourself, in private practice or with a law firm, big law firms, in fact. What was it? The two law firms that you were with?
Webber Wentzel and
Cliff
Dick Hofmeyr, yeah.
Okay, and you were there for a long time. You've been in law practice for a long time, and you decided to join the corporate world.
Yes.
Now, tonight, if you could tell us, firstly, a bit about yourself, what made you get into the law, what made you initially join a law firm, and why the change from a law firm to the corporate world, and then we'll get into the basics about how do you choose lawyers, what does it cost, all the rest of it.
Right.
And while you're at it, if you could tell us the difference perhaps, because sometimes people ask, what's the difference between an attorney and an advocate? But you can leave that for later if you like.
Sure. Mohammed, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the program. I really was looking forward to this evening, and I'm very happy to be here. So, yes, indeed, I was a partner at Webber Wentzel and Cliff Dick Hofmeyr. Spent a couple of years there, and I practiced in the litigation and dispute resolution department of those two firms. So during that time, I got exposure to different types of matters, litigation matters across sectors and across industries as well. So the training was really good. And recently I've made the change. After many years in practice and paying my dues in practice, I decided to move into corporate. And when an opportunity came up with Barlow World Equipment, I grabbed it with both hands. Yeah. I think the one thing that I was always looking for is that, as an attorney, often when you give advice to your clients, you're quite far removed from the practical realities that they are going through from an operational perspective. Right. And I think being at Barlow World Equipment now gives me that. So I get to give advice to the business. A lot of it is around disputes and around regulatory law. And I get to see how that advice gets implemented. And I also get to understand the psyche of our business people and the psyche of the people in our operations to understand how they think. So that move has actually turned out to be quite a rewarding move for me thus far.
Yeah, Munya, this is important because we may have people out there, sort of somebody, a young student wants to get into the law, is not sure. The perception sometimes is lawyers go to court, and that's what they do. They go fight cases or they give legal advice only. But clearly it's more than that. I mean, when you're with a law firm, it's one thing. And now that you're with the corporate world, it's something else. And your advice now is to the company and perhaps to clients as well of the company?
So the way it works in the corporate space is that my client essentially is the business. So the business often comes to the legal department and says, we want to do a particular transaction, or we need to do something. For example, Barlow World Equipment has got operations in different countries in Southern Africa, and they want to do a transaction, say, for example, in Zambia or in Mozambique, and they need to understand the regulatory terrain in those countries in order for them to be able to do that, complete that transaction as swiftly as possible and without, breaching any of the laws. So a lot of the times the business is actually our client. And what we try and do is to ensure that, certainly from a litigation perspective, we try and steer away from litigation to keep the business on a good path.
Munya, I know you're also a CEDA accredited mediator, international mediator. Lawyers, we get the impression, are there to fight the case for you. But mediators try to settle. And as a corporate lawyer, do you advise clients sometimes, look, instead of fighting the case, let's see if we can settle, I suppose?
Yes, absolutely. And, since I did the course with CEDA, this was when I was still in practice, I found it rewarding that I was able to at times resolve matters for clients. And in truth, we need to be open about these things. Litigation is expensive. It's a costly exercise. It's time consuming. It's energy sapping. And a lot of the times, I think clients actually appreciate it if you're able to deliver value to them by assisting them to resolve matters quicker than, as opposed to going to court and litigation. I mean, if you look at a normal court case, Mohammed, in the High Court, you could get a trial date which is a year or two from now, right? There could be a postponement at that time, and then you're kicked out another year or two. Then you could come before a judge, and your matter could be part heard. So technically speaking, you could be tied up in litigation for anything from 5 to 8 years. Right. And in that time, you're losing time which you should be focusing on your core business, and you're actually spending a lot of money. So I found it very rewarding as a mediator to be able to actually bring that skill to the clients that I service. And I find it rewarding to be able to bring that skill to Barloworld Equipment to steer them away from litigation and try and resolve matters sooner rather than later.
And I'm sure there's a lot of success in that rather than litigation, like you say, it takes a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay, but let's sort of some of the basic stuff. There are different ways in which attorneys and clients can agree on fees, for example. Because often people are scared, I'm scared to go to a lawyer, they'd say, because the fees, and how's that determined, and can it be determined differently?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So legal services often are a grudge purchase. It's more so when you are litigating, because when you're litigating, you could win a matter or you could lose a matter, and you are still in for the attorney's fees. Yeah. So typically what would happen is when you go and see an attorney will sit down with you, and now in terms of the new act, the Legal Practice Act, which has now come into being, the attorney actually has a greater responsibility to convey certain information to you regarding the potential financial risk involved in the matter, his legal fees, and he has to do that in writing, and to ensure that you fully understand exactly what it is that you're getting into. And in addition to doing that in writing, he actually has to do it orally as well. Right. And now there's a punishment which seems to suggest that in the event that the attorney does not comply with that particular section, I think it's section 35 of the Legal Practice Act, I stand to be corrected, but if the attorney doesn't comply, that can actually be viewed as a form of misconduct in terms of which disciplinary proceedings can then ensue. So typically, in a normal law firm, what attorneys will do, you will have partners, you will have associates, and you will have candidate attorneys who are trainee attorneys. And what happens is that each of them would have an hourly rate, and that hourly rate is usually determined by their level of experience, it's determined by their seniority, it's determined also by the complexity of the type of work they do. So often you have attorneys who are specialists in particular areas. So for example, intellectual property law or competition law or mergers and acquisitions. So the more complex something is, the more senior a person is and the more experienced they are, the higher the fees are going to be. But all of this is actually changing. The terrain is changing, Mohammed, in view of the act which has recently come into play.
When you just raised something, and it gets me thinking, a client doesn't know all these things. Some do, obviously. There are some people who know the law. They know the law sometimes, I think, even better than some of the lawyers. Yeah. But a client goes to a law firm because it's get recommended, or he sees an advertisement somewhere, or he sees this big sign, there's a big law firm, we've got a problem, let's go there. Sure. How is it decided who at the law firm is going to deal with your case? Because you don't go there and say, I want to see a particular lawyer. Yes, you go there and say, I've got a problem. I need a lawyer. And they, at the reception, will direct you, obviously, to the waiting room. Somebody will come see you. How is it determined which lawyer will be appointed and what level of a lawyer will be appointed?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. Yeah. So that used to happen to me quite often. So I often used to get matters referred through to me from reception when I was still in practice, which I greatly appreciated at the time. So typically what would happen is that in a law firm, you have to make sure that the attorney who's dealing with your matter actually has expertise in that particular area. So just because I think a lot of people look at attorneys and just say, I need to go and see a lawyer, and they just go. And they don't do the necessary checks to find out to say, what type of lawyer do I need here? Do I have a contractual dispute here? Do I have an intellectual property issue? Do I have a competition law issue? Is it a criminal matter? So for example, if you were to come to me and you ask me to represent you in the criminal courts, although I have done that work before, I may not be the best placed person to do that. Okay, you need to find somebody who actually has those expertise, somebody who practices in that particular area, who can then assist the client. Another thing that's also important is to ensure that work is actually done at appropriate levels. And this actually comes to the issue of costs for clients, because we have to face facts. Attorneys' firms are businesses. Right. They're there to make a profit. But in making that profit, there are ethical ways of making that profit. And I believe that the law firms buy into that. A lot of law firms nowadays have introduced very smart technology to actually cut down the time that it takes to perform certain tasks. Because remember, the profession itself is based on selling time. So because it's based on selling time, it almost incentivizes lawyers to spend more time on tasks. But that terrain is now changing, and I think because of the Legal Practice Act, which has come into being, that terrain is changing, because lawyers, there's more of a responsibility on lawyers now to make sure that they are actually proactive in assisting clients insofar as keeping costs manageable.
And obviously it's in the interest of the law firm to do it ethically, to do it right, to satisfy the client, because then they'll get recommended by the client to other people.
Absolutely, Mohammed. And let me tell you, if I had to go and instruct a firm of attorneys, look, I don't know if I can afford one, but if I had to go and instruct a firm of attorneys, I promise you I would probably go back to them if they can show me that whatever they've charged me is actually aligned with the value that they've created for me. At the end of that's certainly how I practice. It's certainly how I do things at Barlow World Equipment. I try and always make sure that I'm delivering value to the business, and I try and see that through to the end.
Okay. Let's come back to this fee, because the fee is an important. Typically, how would they determine fees?
Yeah, so
I'm not sure if it's an unfair question.
No, it's not an unfair question. I think so. The Legal Practice Act is looking at this issue, and I believe that there are going to be certain tariffs which are envisaged, which will be published. But as I said before, I think generally what people do is they look at the experience of the person and the seniority of the person who's going to be doing the work. Now, in a typical a law firm environment, if you instruct a partner, for example, to do certain work, right, it is expected that that partner is going to make sure that wherever there are tasks which can be performed by more junior professionals at a cheaper cost for the client, those tasks be performed by those junior professionals. So that's why candidate attorneys or trainee attorneys come into play. So for example, you shouldn't never find a partner charging you for spending an hour at the photocopy machine photocopying documents. It just doesn't make sense. So work needs to be done at appropriate levels. The fees are then managed in that context.
Okay. And there's little things like, you know, phone calls, because and of course this, you know, the single lawyer who's not part of a law firm, they work differently to the big law firms, obviously.
Yes, in certain aspects they do, but generally I think it's accepted that the way that lawyers work is that there is an hourly rate which is applicable, and that hourly rate is what is charged out at. Of course, there are different ways of agreeing fees. So some people enter into contingency fee arrangements where they take on a matter and they agree a certain percentage of whatever they recover. Nowadays, you can actually also go to attorneys' fees, and a lot of them to attorneys, and negotiate your fees, negotiate the structure of your fees to say, are you going to pay a deposit up front, or actually have a capped fee arrangement so that you know exactly what you're in for. Because I think what makes clients unhappy a lot of the time, certainly what I found during practice, was that they brief you in a matter and all of a sudden they get a huge bill. And they don't understand, and they look at it and they say, but I'm getting this huge bill, but what value has been created for me? And I think at the end of the day, the proposition from lawyers always has to be a value proposition. You need to be able to show that I've delivered particular value to the client in order to justify your fee.
Okay, with that, I think we can take an ad break. Viewers, time for an ad break. Please stay with us. Munya will be with us after the break to answer any questions that you may have. We will have the number on the screen. Please feel free to call in if you have any legal questions that you want to ask. And if you suddenly think of something else related to dispute resolution, I'm sure Munya will be happy to answer your question as well. But, you know, how to choose a lawyer, where do you look for good lawyers, you know, how do you know whether the person is a specialist lawyer, how do you determine fees, any one of those things, please call in. Or if you've got a problem with a lawyer at the moment, how do you deal with that lawyer? So please feel free after the break, please call in. Okay, welcome back. We will have the phone number on the screen for you, for if you want to call in, if you have any questions for Munya. We're talking about how to choose lawyers, how are fees determined, you know, what is a good lawyer, how do you decide what a good lawyer is. Maybe we should start there, Munya. You know, what makes a good attorney? How do you know what's a good attorney?
Yeah. I think first and foremost is the ability to listen. And I think also the ability to be compassionate. Usually when people come and see you as a lawyer, they are usually in distress. And the one thing that I've picked up is that people always see lawyers as goalkeepers, if I can use the soccer analogy. Yeah. So they're there when you're in trouble, okay? But that shouldn't be the case. And people often associate going to see lawyers with, I only go and see a lawyer when something is wrong. But that doesn't have to be the case. In fact, we've recently done an exercise within Barloworld Equipment using the soccer analogy again. And as the legal department, we looked at it and said, where would we like to see ourselves within the business? And we certainly don't want to see ourselves as goalkeepers, because I think that's too late. Yeah. We actually want to see ourselves possibly as midfielders, okay? Being supportive to the guys in the front who can score the goals, and also being able to go back when we need to defend.
So be proactive more than being defensive.
Correct, yeah? Be proactive. So I think we need to take away the stigma that is attached with, I'm going to see my attorney. People automatically see red and they think it's trouble. It doesn't have to be that way. Lawyers are should actually be enablers a lot of the times. Yes, they're there to get you out of trouble, but they should actually be enablers. And I think good lawyers have the ability to communicate in a very simple and assuring way. They have the ability to turn legal jargon into simple words which clients can actually understand. Because a lot of the times, you know, you can imagine going to a doctor and the doctor uses the terms that they use all the time. You don't need them to do that. You actually need them to simplify things. And I think that's what makes a good lawyer. It also is important to keep clients updated. When clients come and see you, they are always very anxious about matters. I remember in practice having attorneys who would call me at midnight and say, yeah, Munya, I just thought of this particular issue. I thought I'd phone you. And I'll take the call and I'd hear them out. But it's because they're very anxious. So you need to almost be a counselor to a degree, be able to manage that anxiety.
Okay, Munya, can I stop you? We've got a caller on the line. Hello, good evening. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Go ahead with your call, with your question.
I just need to ask about this, those other companies that they say they will protect you under labor law and all this. How do they work? Especially when you appoint your lawyer, because I heard so many stories, negative stories about it. Thank you. I'll listen over the TV.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think, yes, we do see all those adverts on TV a lot. And I've often wondered myself how they work. But I understand that what you actually do is you pay a certain amount every month. So it's almost like in the same way that you do with your car insurance, for example. You pay a certain amount every month so that at the time when you then need legal services, you can actually contact them and they are available. And I haven't heard of any very big success stories myself other than the ones I've seen on TV. But I suppose if it is a situation where, and there are lots of people in this country who cannot afford legal services. If it's a situation where you can't afford legal services, it might be worth your while looking into something like that, paying a certain amount every month to ensure that at least if something happens, you have some fallback position and somebody with a legal qualification to be able to assist you.
Okay, so it's a form of insurance.
Yeah, I think, in a manner of speaking, yes, because I think you contribute a certain amount of money every month, and then when you have a legal issue, you can then approach them.
And there's no additional fees. They'll appoint the lawyer for you.
They'll appoint the lawyer, and then they help you. Yes, yeah. But I mean, it's also very important to ensure that you get the right lawyer. I think we touched on this earlier. You certainly want to make sure that the person who's going to be representing you has a firm grip and a firm understanding on the area of law that you are involved in. So you find that a lot of these companies that the gentleman has just mentioned actually deal with a lot of labor-related matters, and you need to make sure that people have the right qualifications for them.
Okay, another caller. We've got two callers in the line. Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, can I ask your guest about the letter? Okay, so he spoke about getting the parties together to the arbitration way.
Mediation.
Now, assuming if the parties concerned do not want to attend the meeting, how do you go about in getting them to the round table conference? And then the other one is that in the event of a lawyer that has maybe passed away and who handles some matters, then how do you contact to get a legal document? Do you contact the Law Society, or is it an archives, or who do you contact?
Okay, all right. Let me maybe start off with your first question. So how do you get the parties around the table? So mediation itself is actually, it's not a compulsory process. It can be compulsory if the parties have agreed it in terms of a contract which governs their relationship. So very often contracts are drafted in a manner that actually prescribes that where a dispute has arisen, there shall either be negotiation between the top executives of the parties. Alternatively, what will happen is that the parties must mediate, and it will have a mechanism built into the agreement for how the parties must mediate. So it will say, for example, who shall appoint the mediator, where the mediator shall be held, how the cost of the mediation shall be shared between the parties. But so that's if you regulate it contractually. But if it's not regulated contractually, then your answer is negotiation. That's when the skills of your attorney actually come into play. You want an attorney who's proactive, and this is where good relationships also come into play. One of the lessons that I learned when I was in practice was to keep good relations with my colleagues. So even if you were in a litigation matter against another colleague, always keep cordial relations, because that enables you to then have certain discussions with the other side and try and agree for a roundtable meeting. Coming on to your second question, the issue of if an attorney has passed on. Yes, certainly. I think it will be contacting the Law Society. As I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, but I think the Law Society is now going to be collapsed into the, in terms of the legal practice, bill, into what's called the LPC. I think it's called the legal, the name escapes me at the moment. But it would be to go to them. There's also going to be an ombud who is established in terms of the Legal Practice Act. So I'd recommend going to them, or certainly contacting the firm to find out if that file is available. There should be other practitioners who should be able to assist you.
Okay. So sorry, one more question.
Go ahead.
One more question is, you mentioned earlier on about the, you should contact an attorney who is specialized in a particular field. In that case, who do you contact?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question properly. Are you saying if you have a matter,
yes.
how do you then determine which attorney to contact to ensure that you get the attorney in the right field?
Yes.
Right. So a lot of it, I think, has to do with just a bit of your own research. So you can certainly go on recommendations. Okay. So it's also about choosing the right size law firm, okay? Because at the end of the day, you need to be satisfied that that particular law firm is aligned with what you can afford insofar as legal fees are concerned. So there are certain law firms which are very niche type law firms, so law firms which practice in, say, for example, competition law or intellectual property law, so they specialize in those areas of law. Then your sort of bigger law firms and some of the medium-sized law firms generally have practitioners who practice across all areas of the law. So I think the idea is to be able to do a bit of research, take the time. A lot of these law firms have websites, go onto their websites, they've all got profiles of who their attorneys are, what their experience is, and I think what I enjoy and what I enjoyed in practice was seeing clients actually asking questions. So I'd sit in consultations often and clients would ask me and say, so tell me, I've got this particular type of matter. This is the type of dispute I have. Have you handled these kind of disputes before? Give me an example of the types of, obviously without breaching confidentiality, give me an example of the type of matters you've handled before, so that you actually understand who is going to be handling your matter. And then from there, it's a matter of building that relationship with your attorney, building that trust, being open with that attorney, because you're protected by attorney-client privilege, to ensure that that attorney can assist you as best as he or she can.
Okay, viewers, Munya, time for another ad break. Viewers, we're going to have another ad break now. Munya will be here after the break. Please stay with us. If you have further questions, Munya will answer your questions. The number will be on the screen. Please call in. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. We've got a guest yet. We're talking about the law. We're talking about how you choose a lawyer, how you determine price, and the number will be on the screen for you to call if you have any questions, any comments, if you want to make a contribution. The number is 011-086-7777. Munya, while we were off, we had a caller, and the question is, how do you know when to negotiate a price with a lawyer, and how do you know you're not being overcharged? That's not an unfair question, is it?
Yeah, no.
It's often a concern for people.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, a valid concern that lots of clients have. I think at the end of the day,
Before you answer that, let's deal with the caller that's on the line. Okay. Sorry to do that to you. Sure. Hello. Okay, it looks like the caller's gone. Sorry, go ahead.
All right.
Maybe it's the same caller who phoned you.
Perhaps, yeah. So I think, as a rule of thumb, I think clients should always feel free to negotiate the fees with attorneys. I think, if you don't ask, you never know what the answer would have been. So I'm a big fan of negotiating the fee. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that whatever it is you're going to be charged, you're actually comfortable with, because you don't want to agree to something and then be lumped with a really heavy attorney's bill, which you're then not able to settle, because then that just creates other problems for you. Okay, and I think your second question was, how do you know that you're not being overcharged? I think it's important for clients to get into the practice of actually finding out. So if you're going to brief, for example, say a medium-sized law firm, try and go and see at least 2 or 3 medium-sized law firms, right, and compare those fees. Obviously, don't sacrifice on the expertise and
because quality is important.
Yes, because quality is very important. You don't want something to be stuck in court, or you don't want an agreement which is drafted badly, which then doesn't protect your rights. But try and find out a range of the sort of fees which are applicable. And once you've decided on an attorney who's actually going to assist you, when you get your invoices, insist that the attendances are actually itemized. So, an attorney will actually say, on attending court on 25th of February, 2 hours, right? So that you can actually see what it is that you're being charged for. So a lot of people will receive invoices and they just look at the bottom number and obviously they get the shock of their lives, but you must actually interrogate the invoices that you get. Make sure that the attendances are actually reasonable. I mean, so for example, if you have a partner who says that he drafted a letter which was a 1-page letter, and he says he spent 3 hours drafting that letter, of course you raise an issue with that. It cannot be possible that you have spent that much time. So it's about clients also being proactive and actually taking the matters into their own hands insofar as making sure that they manage their costs.
Ideally, could you ahead of time get something in writing to say, this is what you will be charged for, this is what the fees are going to be, to appear, say, at the Bargaining Council or the CCMA, yes, or at the court, per hour, these are the charges. If we make phone calls, these are the charges. Can you get that type of thing in writing?
Yes, you can certainly ask for it. And in terms of the new Legal Practice Act, that is actually where we are going. That is the type of detail that I believe attorneys are now going to be required to actually give to clients. And if they don't do that, it might constitute misconduct. Okay.
Munya, we've got a caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I'm speaking to Ivan.
Right, Ivan. Go ahead with your question.
Alex, I asked an attorney to draft first for me.
It's breaking up. Could you sort of move around? Are you phoning from a cell phone, or are you near your TV? And your TV maybe on,
no,
if you can.
From the TV.
Okay, could you just move around a bit? I think your cell phone, it's breaking up.
Okay, let's see.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I asked an attorney to draft this document for paid it report. Now, in the instance, I lost my job. Now, I asked the attorney to ask in a day, but then I realized the attorney did not give me a fee every month on charges.
It's breaking up. Munya, can you hear the...
No, the line is very bad.
The line is very... Your cell phone, could you move around a bit, turn around? Maybe it'll clear up. Move to a different part of the room or wherever you are. Okay, hello.
I've lost him. Yeah.
I think the caller's gone. Okay, so we were talking about that. So you can get in writing from the attorney. You know, this is more or less what it's going to cost. If I appear in court, the hourly rate. So you can get that in writing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think clients must actually insist on that. That way you know what you're in for. There are no surprises, and you're able to actually manage your own budget insofar as that particular matter is concerned. And I think that's what, you know, responsible clients will do. Yeah.
And then just budget, maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less.
Maybe budget, exactly, yeah. And I think with, you know, with attorneys now, in terms of what's required in terms of the Legal Practice Act, if they get to a point where they realize that they might have to, it might cost a bit more than what they had anticipated, they actually need to sit down with you, go through it with you, explain it with you, agree with you for the next stage of the matter in order to be able to, to ensure that those fees are agreed going forward.
Okay, and different attorneys obviously operate differently. Some of them, you know, they'll start charging you from the word go for the consultation. Some of them will say, okay, come in for the consultation, you know, the first consultation I won't charge you, or it's a minimal fee. Sure. Because I have to sort of at least charge you for a bit of my time, but it's, you know, a small amount.
Sure.
That can happen as well.
Yes, that can absolutely happen. I think, the firms that I've worked in, certainly for a first consultation, we didn't charge. We always looked at it and said, we need to deliver value to clients. And it's very strange, Mohammed, because the reality is that when clients actually see value, when you've delivered value, they don't have an issue with paying your invoices. They usually pay. But it's a value thing that they need to see. And I think that's some of the difficulty that people have whenever, you see, if you're going to do an M&A transaction, for example, or purchase a particular business, you can actually see the value of what you have done because it will be in the business that you've purchased or in the shares that you've purchased. But where it's a litigation matter, it's a lot more difficult to actually justify your fee at times. So you need to always ensure that you've delivered value to the client. Then you say, in view of the fact that we've achieved this milestone at this stage, we take our, we hereby account to you, and you provide your invoices.
Munya, what about sort of payment by results? We're here in the United States, and I think here as well, ambulance chasers, they come to you and they say, we'll do your case. If we win the case, you pay us a certain percentage. That happens in South Africa.
Yes, it does happen. So that's your typical contingency fee type arrangements. Yes, and it does happen. And nowadays you've got all sorts of different types of models of how people actually deal with the issue of fees. And again, it is actually driven by clients who are being a lot more proactive in saying that the cost of legal fees has to go down. So, for example, my role at Barloworld Equipment, one of the things that I'm there to do is to ensure that we actually have less litigation in our company, and that is what we're working towards to ensure that we steer clear of that. Yeah.
And we need to come back because the important thing, often people, specialist lawyers, because certain lawyers specialize, and we know, for example, at the CCMA, at the bargaining councils, or even sometimes at courts, or when you're negotiating a deal, you can see that the lawyer doesn't have a clue what they're doing. I mean, I sometimes do arbitrations, and a lawyer that appears, you can see that the person has never done labor law before, and it's the first time. Yeah. That happens as well.
Yeah, it does happen, and it's very unfortunate when that happens. It really shouldn't, and in fact, I probably think that if an attorney is practicing in an area that he's not really qualified to practice in, it actually puts him and his firm at risk because if something goes wrong in that matter, then it's a matter of disciplinary proceedings. So at the end of the day, I think it's important. I think most lawyers, you will get a few bad apples that spoil the cart, but generally most lawyers actually practice in the areas in which they have speciality.
Okay, caller on the line. Hello, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Go ahead.
Assalamu. I'd like to find out one issue here. If a person is born in a foreign country, but he becomes a South African citizen, now he passes away here. Now, the land in a foreign country, does that have to be registered in South Africa? If in any event it's sold there, what happens to the land issue?
I'm not sure if you can answer that question. Somebody owns property. You say somebody owns property overseas.
Yes.
He comes from there, lives in South Africa. What happens to that property there?
Yeah, he passes away here. he passes away here.
Okay, it'll depend on the law of that country. That would be governed by the law of that country, not by South African law.
Okay.
I'm not familiar.
Issue with the land in India, so that's why I'm asking that question. A lot of people are having disputes over that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Mohammed is correct. I think if obviously the land is in India, I think any legal issues pertaining to how that land is dealt with needs to happen in India. I don't see how a South African court. I think it's probably a jurisdiction question.
Right.
I think I can't see how a South African court would have the ability to make a pronouncement on that land, which would be enforceable in the Indian jurisdiction. But I must say, I'll qualify that answer by saying that I'm not an expert in that field. So I'd be happy to have a look at it and probably educate myself on it as well.
And maybe we should get a guest on this program who can talk to us about that subject.
No, thank you very much. Yes.
Jazakallah, thank you for your call. Okay, Munya, that obviously happens. Sometimes jurisdiction, we get jurisdiction issues within South Africa as well. For example, the one court doesn't have a jurisdiction, or the labor court doesn't have jurisdiction, the CCMA doesn't have, the small claims court doesn't have jurisdiction,
Absolutely, Mohammed.
So that happens as well. But before you answer that, let's take an ad break, and after the ad break, we can talk about that. Viewers, and be with us, please. After the break, call in. Comment if you have anything, if you have any questions for Munya, please stay with us. Viewers, welcome back. We've got Munya in the studio. He's answering our questions, some really interesting questions. Munya, certainly, there's a caller on the line. Hello.
Hello.
Go ahead with your question.
I'd like to ask a question about a notice of hearing issued by the employer, coupled with a letter of suspension. The letter of suspension states that you are suspended in a precautionary measure pending the outcome of an investigation. Now, the letter of suspension is delivered on a particular day, and the notice of hearing is written on the same day. So where is the investigation?
I need clarity on this because it doesn't sound right. You get a letter of suspension, but the date for the hearing is on the same day that you get the letter. Is that what you're saying?
No, the notice of hearing.
Yes.
Is written one day after the suspension letter is written.
Yeah.
But the suspension letter is delivered on the same day the notice of hearing is issued.
Okay, but the hearing date is at a later date. Is that correct?
At a later date.
Okay. So that's normal. That's normal because they suspend you with pay pending a disciplinary hearing. Munya, do you want to?
Yeah, that is correct. So I think your question relates to it's a procedural issue. I don't see anything wrong with that procedure. I think obviously in due course what they would then do is to advise him of the date of the hearing. And the time period for the date of the hearing. You have to get ample notice for that. It's procedural, and you would then confirm that you're available for that date, or you be required to make yourself available on that date and have enough time to prepare. I think it's a procedural
Okay,
issue.
and as you said, it's called precautionary suspension. It's suspension with pay, and the reason they suspend employees with pay pending a disciplinary hearing because they're afraid if you go to the workplace, you may interfere with the evidence.
Correct.
That is one of the main reasons why they would suspend you. But it's suspension with pay.
Just to follow up,
Yes.
if you are considering a breach of the code of conduct,
Yes.
how do they establish that? Because they are issuing a notice of hearing.
Right. They would have to present evidence at the disciplinary hearing. They will present evidence. You will have an opportunity to defend yourself. You can bring witnesses. You can bring whatever evidence you prefer. You can cross-question their witnesses. You can question their evidence.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Right. Good. He's answered.
Okay, Munya, we're talking about, sometimes attorneys don't return phone calls, for example. They don't give you a progress report. How do you deal with an attorney like that?
Yeah. It does
what can
happen,
you-
unfortunately, Mohammed, and it's unfortunate when it happens because I think at the end of the day, once an attorney has been briefed.
Okay, I need to interrupt again. Sorry
Okay,
for that,
no, no
Munya. We've
problem.
got a call on
Okay.
that. Go ahead. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
How are you?
Well, thanks.
Well,
Go ahead
thank
with your question.
I'm okay. Yes. I'm just asking a question. My dad. Yes, my dad passed away.
Right.
He lost a lot of money.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Pension from AXA. And I couldn't prove to him how the
Okay,
money
sorry.
was
Could we just ask you to mute your TV at the back? There seems to be an echo. There seems to be an interference on the sound. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I can hear now. They couldn't prove to him because he was only asking for the statement that proves how the money was spent. On the other statement that he had, it showed his but 9 accounts were linked to his account. And they didn't have any slip because they couldn't use the ATM. He had 500,000 in the bank. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an emotional time for you. We're sorry to hear about it.
Yes. The thing is, he just passed. He just had a heart attack after he found out that he doesn't have anything, a cent, and he couldn't get any help. We sent emails to Ombudsman, and Ombudsman advised us if we can take a lawyer. But when Ombudsman replied to us, my dad already dead. And 2 weeks after my dad passed away, my mother passed away, and I'm only
sorry to hear that.
one. So I just want, how must I take them to court? Because I want them to show me proof. Because I can't understand what happened. You see, that's why I'm even speaking now. I can't understand what happened. And the huge bank like them couldn't prove to us what happened with money. I have papers here. There's nothing showing that how did the money get passed, everything. They didn't give us anything. The other slip they gave us, it wasn't your signatures on the slip. I don't know which lawyer must I take, where must I go. I just want proof. I don't want the money to come back because I don't think it's going to come back. But I just want them to show me what happened, the transaction, the signatures, what happened. Because he didn't use a cent. He worked for the company for 4 years. He didn't buy a car. He didn't buy even a house. He didn't even take me to university. He thought the money was fixed. You see, and he was an old man.
Okay.
So that's why he had a heart attack.
Sorry, really sorry to hear about your loss, but let's give Munya a chance to answer. A difficult situation to be in. She's there.
Yeah.
Where does she turn to now?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation to be in, and our sincere condolences on your loss. I think you definitely need some help, and I think an attorney is probably the right, an estate's attorney is probably the right person to probably have a chat with and see if they can assist you. I would be more than happy to speak with her off the line. I mean, I'm happy for you to give her my telephone number and she can phone me, and I'd be happy to put her in touch with somebody. Because I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is that you want answers, and I think there are ways to go about getting those answers. And at times it may be something as simple as a letter. There might be a logical explanation for everything, but at least you need to get that closure and get to the bottom of what actually happened.
Okay, so after the show, if you phone the studio, they'll give you Munya's number, or you leave your number with them and he will call you either way, and he'll guide you who to speak to, who to go and see. Is it possible in a case like that to get, thank you for your call, and really our condolences on your losses. Somebody like that can go to some pro bono office? Or,
yes, absolutely.
And you'd probably be able to give guidelines
yes,
on
no,
that.
Absolutely. I definitely will do that. And I mean, if she leaves her number, I'll definitely give her a call tomorrow and just have a chat with her. There are many ways in which we could do it. It could be a law clinic, which could, as long as you can meet their requirements, they would be able to assist. And I think she really sounds like somebody who needs the assistance now.
Okay. Munya, before the caller, we were talking about sort of not very nice lawyers. Don't return your call, yes. Don't give you updates on where your case is, yes. Or what you can still do, what you have to do.
Sure.
But again, before you answer, we've got a call on the line. Yeah. Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Go ahead. Go ahead with your question. Hello. Hello. Go ahead. We can hear something in the background. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead with your question.
I just need to find out something about my mother's father has land.
Okay, just it's breaking up a bit. Are you close to your TV and your TV is on? It's interfering with the call.
Okay, now it's better.
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, okay. She has a land. Her father, late father, left for her. She has from the world, and she has other siblings as well who inherited their shares already. Now her problem is that the land which she was given to her, the transfers were not done from the other party. So how does she go forward with this? Because this matter has been like over 20 years.
Sure.
Right? Still pending for her. And every time you try to get through to the lawyer, you can't get through because they tell you can only speak to the right. Now when you speak phone to the right, they don't give you information. They tell you must go to the guy who was the transfer the other part, which they haven't, and they've been so long for so many years now. How do we go with that?
Yeah, thanks. I heard your question in bits and pieces there. Unfortunately, the line wasn't very clear. But I think, gathering from what you're saying, I think you probably need to, again, also probably see an estate's lawyer. And, obviously transferring of land is done by conveyances. So it would need to be a firm of attorneys with a conveyancing practice, which can then help you for that land to be, to be moved across into your mother's name. I think that's what would be required. From the little that I heard.
Okay, the callers offline, they were listening to the program. Munya, come back. Maybe we'll still be able to do that. We've got about 3 minutes before the end of the program. Lawyers that are not so nice, don't return your phone calls. Those are, how do you deal with a lawyer like
those that? When those things happen, it's very unfortunate because, as I said before, when clients come and see you, they're actually quite desperate at times because things are not looking good and whatever it is that's troubling them from a legal perspective. So you actually want lawyers to be proactive in contacting clients and to report to clients regularly.
Right.
That is extremely important. Returning phone calls, not giving regular reports, not attending to a matter are all matters which can arise in a disciplinary proceeding. And in terms of the new act, there's the Ombud, obviously, who clients can go to. And on top of that, there's the LPC, the Legal Practice Council, I remember the name now, that you can actually go to for purposes of making any of those complaints. And they will set up certain disciplinary committees, which will be required to actually take legal practitioners through disciplinary proceedings. So when those kind of things happen, clients must be rest assured that they do have recourse and that they must take those matters up.
Okay, maybe we've got time for one final question because we're almost at the end of the program.
Okay.
Often lawyers ask you to place a deposit.
Yes.
What happens to them? How does that fit into the lawyer's fees?
Right. So the first thing that clients need to understand is that when a lawyer asks you for a deposit, that deposit goes into a trust account. Okay. When it is in that trust account, that money does not become the property or the money of the lawyer. It remains your money, okay? So often what lawyers do, because you have to appreciate that there's quite a lot of risk. There are people out there who've been known to brief attorneys and shop around, so then when they realize that they can't pay this one, and then they leave and they don't pay. So unless a relationship has been built up in terms of which there's trust insofar as the fact that invoices will be paid, generally attorneys will ask for a deposit. That money goes into a trust account, it sits there, the idea being that when they invoice you, they can then ask you to say, here's our invoice. It's an invoice for 10,000 Rand. We have 50,000 Rand, which is sitting in trust. Please, can you authorize us to, receive payment from things? You would then be required to authorize that in writing. And once you've done that, they can then debit the fees and, for purposes of their payment.
Right. So
credit the fees.
The important thing is it's not the lawyer's money yet. Yes. It goes into a trust. And of course, once the case is done, it becomes part of the fees.
That is correct.
But the lawyer obviously will have to account.
That is correct. And whatever is left over, if your matter settles and they've only invoiced you 10,000 Rand and you'd put in a 50,000 Rand deposit, that 40,000 Rand needs to be transferred back to you.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, Munya, thank you very much for making yourself available. We've come to the end of the program. Viewers, we will be next week, back next week with another edition of Legal Ease, where we convert legal jargon into everyday language for you. Munya, it's really been a pleasure having you here, and hopefully it's not the last time. We're going to make sure that you come back because, as you can see with the callers, we haven't exhausted the topic. There's still a lot more to talk. I had a long list of questions and I couldn't even get through those, but hopefully we'll have you back again.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's good to be able to help people and to speak with people and to be on the program. Thank you so much.
With that, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and inshallah we'll be back next week with another edition of Legal Ease.